Hello, this week we're going to be expanding our dialogue system by adding options for which our player can select. To start off, we're going to create a new structure, calling this s_answers. In this structure, we're going to need three variables. The first one will be a string called answer. Next is an integer called jump_to_index. And lastly, we're going to need a boolean called end_conversation_without_advancing. Next is another structure called s_dialog. It'll have four variables. The first will be a string called dialog. And then we're going to have an array of the structure we just made, calling it answers. Next is a boolean called end_conversation. And lastly, we'll add a sound cue called audio. Then over in the structure s_conversations that we made last time, we can change the array from a string to the dialog structure we just made. After we have that done, we can create a new widget called w_answers. This will be the answer that the player can select. Start off with a size box, setting this to desired on screen. And put the size to something that you're going to be happy with in your game. Next, add a button to the size box. I'll be giving it a padding of 10, and then we can rename it. I'll be calling mine b_answer. We are then also going to need some text, so I'll add that in. Setting its horizontal alignment to fill, the justification to center, and then setting its visibility to not hit test visible for self and children. Now we're going to create a text binding for this widget. We're going to create a variable called answer text, and we're going to set that to a string. This will be instance editable and exposed on spawn. We can then just plug that into the return value. Then we're going to add three more variables. All three of them will be instance editable and exposed on spawn. The first one will be a reference to our HUD, and then an integer called jump_to_index, and lastly a boolean called end_conversation_without_advancing. Finally, we can start with events. So create an on-clicked event for our button, and add our end_conversation boolean, and run that into our branch. Off the true path, we can get a reference to our HUD and call hide_convo. We'll come back here later when we have a new pin for end_conversation in the hide_conversation. Next, off the false path, we can get our jump_to_index and see if it's less than 0. If it is, again, we're going to go into the hide convo. Then off the false path, we're going to get our HUD and we're going to set our conversation index to our jump to index. For now, we can save this and then jump over into our HUD. In our HUD, we can create a size box. Setting its anchor to center, positions in X and Y are set to 0, and its alignment is set to 0.5 in both. Lastly, check size to content. Inside that box, we'll add a vertical box. Now over in the event graph, in our hide convo function, add a new input of the type boolean called advanced conversation. Make sure the vertical box is set to a variable. And at the end of hide convo, call clear children off the vertical box. Next, we get the advanced conversation into a branch. And add a few more variables called NPC dialog. This will be a string. And next is a NPC reference. If we compile now, we'll get an error in our getText function. So let's fix that by clearing out all this and just adding the NPC dialog string. Next, in our on mouse button down, just unplug the array and plug it back in. After that, add a OR boolean. We are going to need to get a copy of our conversation at the current index and then break it and plug our end conversation in. We're going to need a new function called advanced text. In this function, we're going to get our vertical box and clear its children. Then we're going to get our current conversation, break and get a copy at the current index. And break that. And off our audio cue, create a sound 2D and promote that to a variable. Now before we create our sound, we're going to check if it's valid. If it's not, just go straight into the create sound queue. If it is, call set active and set it to false. For the next part, copy the sound, valid and active, and set new active to true. Next we can get our NPC dialog. Both is not valid and active will run into this. And the dialog will come from our broken current conversation. Next off the answer array, we can check if it is empty with a branch. And then we can call a for each loop of the false path. And we can create a widget of the type w_answer. And break the array element, and then plug in the variables and set our HUD reference to self. After we create each widget, we're going to need to get our vertical box and add a child. We can then add an advanced text function into our on mouse button down. Then back in the answer widget, plug our end conversation into our hide conversation. Next in our NPC, we can split this event here at the branch. We'll need this for later, so don't delete it. And off the HUD, we can set our NPC reference to self. Then create a new custom event, calling this advanced conversation. And plug this into the part that we broke off earlier. Back in the HUD widget, in the hide conversation function, we can get our NPC reference and call the advanced conversation function we just made and plug that into the false path. And then in the show conversation function, we can add the advanced text function. We're also going to need to call the advanced text function in the answer widget after we set our conversation index. And with the coding done, let's add a little conversation here and test it out. And now that all this is working, we can call this done and finish out our video. But thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.